On paper, this is one of the richest countries on the entire planet. Measured per person, it is richer than the United States, richer than Germany, richer even than Japan. And yet, within living memory, just 50 years ago, this very same country was one of the poorest nations in all of Western Europe, a gray, struggling place that its own people fled by the million. So how exactly did Ireland get this rich and this astonishingly fast? The official answer is a kind of economic miracle, but the real answer is far, far stranger than that. Because a huge part of Ireland's spectacular headline-grabbing wealth does not, in any meaningful sense, actually exist. This is the story of how a tiny rain-soaked nation on the western edge of the Atlantic went from famine to extraordinary fortune in a single human lifetime, and how, almost by accident, it built one of the most beautiful and convincing illusions in all of modern economics. To understand the trick, you first have to understand the sheer depth of the hole that Ireland had to climb out of. For most of its modern history, Ireland was poor. Not merely struggling, genuinely, desperately poor. The Great Famine of the 1840s killed around 1 million people and drove 1 million more out of the country entirely, packed onto emigrant ships bound for distant shores. The scar ran so deep that Ireland is, even today, one of the only countries on Earth whose population is still smaller than it was nearly 2 centuries ago. For generations afterwards, it remained a quiet agricultural backwater, clinging to the western edge of Europe while the rest of the continent industrialized. Independence, finally won in 1922, did not magically fix any of it. Joining the European Club in 1973 cracked open a door, but the country still could not seem to get ahead. By the 1980s, Ireland looked, frankly, like a failed economy. Unemployment was running near 17%. Government debt had ballooned until it was almost the size of the entire economy, and its single greatest export had quietly become its own young people. Tens of thousands of them packed up and left every single year, for London, for Boston, for Sydney. It was, by almost any measure you choose, a lost decade. This was simply not a country that anyone, anywhere, expected to win. Then in the 1990s, something fundamental flipped. Between 1995 and 2007, the Irish economy more than doubled in size in barely more than a decade. They called it the Celtic Tiger. And here's the part that really, genuinely matters. A great deal of it was completely, verifiably real. 4 powerful forces lined up at almost exactly the same moment. 1. Ireland sat comfortably inside the European single market, but it spoke English, which made it the perfect landing pad for American corporations that wanted tariff-free access to over 400 million European consumers. 2. A young, highly educated English-speaking workforce, the payoff from decades of investment in free secondary and university education. 3. Billions upon billions in European structural funds quietly rebuilding the roads, the ports, and the universities. And 4. The magnet that pulled the whole thing together, one of the very lowest corporate tax rates anywhere in the developed world, just 12.5%. So they came. Apple, Intel, Pfizer, Google, Microsoft. One by one, the largest and most powerful companies in America planted their European headquarters on a small, rainy island out in the Atlantic. And for a while, this was no illusion at all. Real factories, real offices, real exports, and real, well-paid jobs. But the Celtic Tiger had a second engine, and this one was rotten to the core. Cheap, easy credit and a frenzied property mania slowly turned the entire country into one vast construction site, financed almost completely by borrowed money and debt. So when the global financial crisis finally struck in 2008, the bubble did not just quietly deflate, it detonated. Irish banks were so dangerously, recklessly exposed that the government guaranteed almost the whole banking system overnight, and in doing so, very nearly bankrupted the state itself. As the banks stared into total collapse, a humiliated Ireland was forced in 2010 to accept a €67.5 billion bailout from the European Union and the IMF. Then came the long, grinding years of austerity, pay cuts, brutal tax hikes, and entire ghost estates of half-built empty houses simply left to rot in the rain. Most countries that fall this hard and this fast stay flat on the floor for a decade or more. Ireland, somehow, did something almost nobody on earth expected. It got back up, and it came roaring back faster than anyone had thought possible. And that, right there, is exactly where this story starts to get genuinely strange. In 2015, the Irish economy did not just recover. According to the official government figures, it grew by 26% in a single year. Not 2.6, 26. No normal economy anywhere on earth does that. The Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman took one look at the numbers and gave the whole bizarre phenomenon a mocking name that instantly stuck: Leprechaun economics. So here is what had actually happened. A small handful of giant multinationals, above all Apple, had quietly restructured their Irish operations and shifted ownership of intellectual property worth hundreds of billions, patents, software, and drug formulas onto their Irish books, purely and entirely for tax reasons. One of them had been routing its profits so aggressively that its effective tax rate in Europe fell in a single year to a barely believable 0.005%. Overnight, on paper, Ireland suddenly appeared to produce all of it. But no new factories had been built. No new Irish workers had been hired. It was an accounting event, not a real one. The distortion grew so absurd that Ireland's own statisticians had to invent a brand new measure called GNI star, simply to strip out the multinational mirage and reveal the actual economy hiding underneath. And the gap they found is genuinely enormous. Ireland's real national income is roughly 40% smaller than its headline figure. Almost half of the so-called richest country in Europe is, in a very real sense, a ghost. So is the whole thing just a fake? No, and this is the crucial nuance that almost every other video misses completely. Underneath this statistical illusion, Ireland genuinely did transform itself. Real employment now sits at record highs. Real pharmaceutical and technology companies export real, world-class products from Irish soil. Irish workers really are, on average, among the most productive and the best paid anywhere in Europe. And yet, even sitting on all of that wealth, the country still suffers one of the worst housing shortages in the entire developed world. The wealth, in other words, is real. It is simply far smaller and far, far narrower than the headline number screams. And that narrowness is precisely the danger. Because a tiny handful of foreign multinationals now pay a genuinely frightening share of the entire government's money. According to Ireland's own independent fiscal watchdog, in 2024, just 3 companies paid around 46% of all corporation tax, roughly 13 billion euros, and the top 10 firms together paid about 60%. 3 corporate boardrooms, almost half of the entire corporate tax base. If even 1 or 2 of them simply moved their accounting somewhere else, Ireland would have a hole blown clean through its national finances overnight. The country is genuinely rich. But it is rich the way a small town with one single giant factory is rich. Wonderful. Right up until the day that factory quietly decides to leave. And now, the ground itself is shifting under the entire Irish model. One by one, the world is deliberately closing the very tax loopholes that built modern Ireland in the first place. A brand new global minimum corporate tax of 15% is now rolling out across dozens of countries, quietly erasing a large part of Ireland's special advantage. And then, in 2024, in a twist that Ireland itself actually fought hard against, Europe's highest court ruled that the old sweetheart arrangement had been illegal state aid all along and ordered Apple to hand Ireland 13 billion euros in back taxes. Ireland had genuinely spent years in court battling, almost unbelievably, to refuse the money. So Ireland's challenge for the next decade is brutally, painfully simple. It has to turn this temporary windfall, handed to it by a handful of foreign giants, into something permanent and something genuinely its own: homes, infrastructure, Irish companies built to last. And it has to do all of it before the global tax game that made it so rich finally comes to an end. Because the real lesson of Ireland is not simply cut your taxes and get rich. It is something far deeper and far more useful than that. A single number on a chart can make an entire country look like a miracle, while the real economy underneath tells a much quieter and far more fragile story. So do not just ask how rich a place is. Ask how real that wealth truly is. So if you want to know which country I break down next, and whether its wealth turns out to be real or just another clever accounting trick, then make sure you subscribe. Next time, we travel south, all the way to Africa, and to the giant that somehow managed to lose half of its entire economy in just 10 years. It is the strange and sobering story of how the single biggest economy on the whole continent very nearly vanished into thin air. See you there.